that's the Tamji to the Sanjoko, Toby, Childo, Tabachin Bigi, that Lam Jamni, Janju Sam, Passion to gain Yamlindi, Pachelia, or Digor, no, Zugi, everybody, that Losha to the Badi Sugore. The Nezata Casaconzota, the Negi Tabachimbe, Lam Yamni Jimba, Canesios in Ikalia, and Tombani, Namshata, Numudri, Namsha, Mitabocomiata, the Ne, and the Koigi. Dunga some daily target somebody on Roche, Dene and Moshilia and Jigger Chatham Rajin Juba, Chisanga the Korea Judy, Dinsi Marik body the key, Dinsi Marik by the point did don't want you to put locum the Pongoza, Di Nyambo, and don't want you some data. And Dene and this is Jam Nishio. The SM Jatam Soko October show, Sipio Community, and the Nigo Community to Kisiya, the Donlan Community, Shuare, that the Nick Shuve Yamling Jimbachaza, that Su Dubaina, Dogma Le Charge, on to Shinma, Yamlicha or Essetic answer, out to Shin Shuare.
Good morning. So we've covered quite a bit of the text thus far. Of the 7 points, we have covered 4 of them already. So the very purpose for us looking at this text is so that we can come to develop the deep and sincere motivation to be able, see deep and sincere motivation to want to guide each and every being to attain their own enlightenment, their freedom from suffering. And the second purpose of engaging with this text is to learn how to do so. We start with the first of the 7 points, which is training in the preliminaries. This is 2 general sections. The first is those 6 preparatory practices, and the second are the preliminaries themselves, which there have 2 sections. Recognizing this precious human rebirth and its impermanence, and then meditating on the sufferings of samsara, presented through the suffering, true sufferings and true origins. This gets us to recognize clearly the cause of suffering, which are our afflictions, which have as their very root the ignorance of self-grasping. And how to abandon that? It's imperative to train in the wisdom understanding emptiness. And this then is presented in the context of the main practice of cultivating ultimate bodhicitta, whereby one trains in cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness. This is followed then by the second of the main practices, which is conventional bodhicitta. And there, this is the practice of equalizing and exchanging self with others, and expressed or practiced through taking and giving. So this is the main body of the text. Having trained well in that, one needs to have further armor or skills to deal with life's challenges. And this is presented then in the 3rd point, transforming adversity into the path. In that, being amongst beings, ordinary suffering beings, in order to benefit them, one will encounter many adverse circumstances, and therefore one needs skill in transforming those into the path to enlightenment. Then yesterday, we came to the 4th point, which was presenting a summary of a lifetime's practice by means of the 5 powers.
Jigli Shipoa said, Poa said, Koyu Dunga Tadali, Dreja, Tarbico Montoya, Sanjoko Montoya, Setine, Jawachimaldra, the Poa Sigora, and then had the Poa said, Ticora, Chesadineza, Tabachimbi, Lam, Tabachimbi, Lam Yamlin Jeje, and the Poe, Lam Yamlin Jeje, Kovale, Poche, and the Sanjoko Montoyana, and Setine Poje, and Jawachimagi, all go on Toyagilia, Poe, Dama, the Dama de Caresene. Dogma di Yamlin Cesadine on the Shigalam Gabline, Dogma di Dusin and Yamlin Jane and Lucian, Cepo, as a Cepo, as a Cepo, Setine, she had the Dusin to Cepo and Adine, Sosuke, and Giachimalia, and the Gasoriana, Diagelo Giaviana, and the 타다 미고 파도 받이 뭐 강소를 깨와도 말에 해야지 어두 순고로와
And yesterday afternoon, when we were looking at the fourth of the 7 points, that of presenting a summary of a lifetime's practice, we saw the 5 powers. And these 5 powers then, one is encouraged to train in this way throughout one's life. This will lead to great familiarity with these trainings through this habituation gained from a lifetime's practice. Then, when the time of death comes, when the time comes to transmigrate from this life to the next existence, then one needs to continue practicing these 5 powers, but the sequence changes. So just to talk a little bit about the term, the Tibetans, why do you know that? Poa, which in my original translation I translated as transference of consciousness, and yesterday I said transformation. So again, saying the meaning is really of this term poa is that of moving from here to there, or going from here to there. So perhaps transmigration is better. So as the Mahayana instructions for transmigration is these very 5 powers, their practice is essential. In that, in this context, this term means moving from this life to the next, or rather not necessarily life, but existence. In that, moving from this life, hopefully remaining in the higher realms, or from this life into the Pure Lands, or into the state of enlightenment. So this is this process of transmigration at the time of death. And here, one practices the 5 powers in a slightly different order, starting first with that of the virtuous seeds, then prayer and dedication, then thirdly revulsion, fourthly resolve, and fifthly familiarization. 람 냠는 게 림바디 아니 이거 공부도 배친 바도 또 포화세요. 제가 네 포화 또 포화. 되네 체포화. 체대되는 시제 개와 침을 줘야 돼. 체포화. 때미 체포화 그래서는 체포에서서 시 체디마 다들 체디 파 도르제 개와 침을 체신다지를 요한바 체포화. 포화세디 제자다 사지디네 샹라 포화. 네 포화. 안에 또 포화. 안에 체포화. 안에 지기 된 제자 도시네. 제자다 안지기 가브리엘야 안지 라미기 도시엔 조화제제 안에지 안에 가서 포화지 위해서 미시엘야 포화지 위해서 저러와 대소 안에 라미기 냠렌제제 매니 안에 지금 아주 되어바당 되니기 된조이 된래게 셈전이나 안 되니기 즉 라미 도비기 된제야 되어졌나 따야지요 그러시고 되니기 안 체포와 이게 됐을 근데 포화 잡아서 되니기 순거로와 니나신 소소랑랑기 포화세도 검제 냠렌제제 인디제 다 동미도네 냠렌제다 디네토네 냠렌제 소수기다 도시네 아니 네티네 파르제야 다시네 겨울렘바 지투야디기 포화세 지상 포화세디 네네 네션라실의 포화 소소 도베 네상 교화디네 도베 고황 야 철조와 도보 포화 네 포화 근데 세티네 세치말 조아데 세포화세 포화세디 지상 직직이 조아디 고구도와 포화세 누가 안에 야가 줘야 제 용구래 야간에 누가 줘야 용구래 사지션에 현나 줘야 포화세 대 간질 두수 보여줘 봐 될지 고구버려 To talk a little further then about this term that you know, poa, this term that you know most commonly translated as transference of consciousness. When one looks in the dictionary, one sees many other ways to translate it, and this will now match with what Genle is saying. In that, there are, if I count it correctly, 5 different ways that one engages in poa, or where this term poa would be used. So one that is perhaps best known amongst us, amongst Western students, is the one where a Lama does the forceful transference of consciousness of an ordinary being, human or animal, to Sukhavati, to that pure land. So this is one form of poa. So there we notice translated as transference of consciousness. But it's also, this term is used in a very general sense when one, and now translated as transmigrates from one life to the next. So the same term can be used in this way, because this is the general meaning of it. Because the general meaning of this is, now we can say a third way the term is used, is to move. So if you move from this place to that place, this term can be used. There are other words, but this word can be used. So that's a third way it can be used. A fourth is when a being moves from, say, the state of a desire realm god to that of a form realm god, or a form realm god to a formless realm god. It can be used in that state too. And the fifth would be a practitioner, an ordinary bodhisattva, who engages in, here we translate it as transference of consciousness. So, so not forceful. This is where a bodhisattva transfers their consciousness through the realization of emptiness at the time of, in the death process. And they move from being in the Mahayana path of preparation to the Mahayana path of seeing and meditation. So this is a fifth form of, or fourth usage of the term in relation to an ordinary bodhisattva realizing emptiness and in the death process, and thereby transferring it's literally conceptual consciousness from the path of preparation to the path of seeing and meditation. So these are various ways that the same term poa is used. So it doesn't always mean, as we come across it in English, this forceful transference of consciousness. All that said, now here, what is being presented is how we as ordinary practitioners can transfer our consciousness ourselves. So, or maybe it would be to aid our transmigration would be best. So our transmigration as ordinary beings from this life through into our next life. So I'll just repeat the different ways the word can be used as a forceful transference of consciousness by the Lama to an ordinary being. Just general transmigration from one life to another, moving from one area to another, from within one realm, like the desire realm God, to a higher state of God, or for a ordinary bodhisattva to realizing emptiness and attaining the Arya states.
초람 초람니야 절람 톱로도 초람네 절람도 포와래 거래. 지상 초람디 똑바고도 절람포. 된 절람니야 똑바공지 통람토이도 절람네 통람도 포와서 그래. 다 통람디야 뭐 고모저도 곰람토이도 통람네 곰람도 포와서 그래. 지상도 곰람나에 곰람디 톱제티는 얌네 제제 안데 지 로비 얌람이 대시 산적고 토이도 된 로바네야 산jel이야 포와서 그래. 지상 포와서 되는 똑바 뭐 공부도 포교와 되려고 포와시고 지금 포와 지지를 규조와 되려 포와시고 진짜다 dinere da nang ju da dinege da jidan de music de jago ma de ne don da sam da be ne be nang ju dang bo che che ga sam le gyune me du me me de yan an ji nang ba ya man han ji lia an je lia ko chue le de ba ji nang be gi chue nyam ne je ba ju ne nang ba la ko chi ro ba nang ba lo po wa nang ba chi ro po wa yong gu lo wa 如当不拿不明白当今我的这全民生养去了现在有了这破坏是就是这等到了破坏是的现在没有那个就北京拿了错了的就烂的破就烂的通浪破通浪工人破的那个破坏是谈一结果了 다들이 아주게 포화시대 태파 침비 추념는 제네 하는 거지 토념지 내려 때네 안 산교고 뭐 토바들라 아는 뭐 샘진기 네 때네 냠는 똑바디 포여지든 산교고 말에 토바도 포화셔야지 시작도와 안 다들 아주데 시가라마 삼다이디 포화셔야디 태파 침비에 되는게 안지 나 람른 냠는지 버림방아지 삼다제 세디네 세치말 포화 세디네 시제 세치모를 보여드릴까봐 디위가로 되는게 나한테 냠는 전도 시절에 보내야 보여래 사실. 지 용으로 제상 곰람 톱네 로블람 차그로와 되네 밀로블람 세대 상조고 봐도나 밀로란다 봐로. 간실로 똑바 권유공도 펴와들라고 포와서 똑바디 파 규르지는 야가도 침반들 포와서 보고 비슷한 거래.
So mentioned these 5 ways that this 5 different contexts that the same term is utilized. But just to expand on one of them, I mentioned how the ordinary bodhisattva transfers their consciousness. Transfers their conceptual consciousness from an ordinary state to the Arya state. But in fact, just present this more clearly, every transmigration of a practitioner from one path to the next, we can use this term poa. So to move from, because again it can be translated as move, to move from the path of accumulation to the path of preparation, to move from the path of preparation to the path of seeing, and from the path of seeing to migrate, to move, to transfer one's consciousness to the path of meditation, and to transmigrate from the training paths, so from in this case, path of meditation, to the path of no more training, Buddhahood. The same term can be utilized. So I can recognize that this word has a lot of usage, more, and then says the translator, more so than we used to in our English books. And then further Genla said, and this word can also be used, we would say in English, can be translated as to convert. So someone converting from a non-Buddhist view to the Buddhist religion, or from the Buddhist religion to another religion or no religion. So there, the same term can be used and be translated there as convert. So this is just to give you an idea of how this word is utilized or can be utilized in many situations. Here, in this context, it is about how a practitioner of the Mahayana migrates towards Buddhahood, migrates from one life to the next, progressing towards Buddhahood. So this would be very broad, but in the context of the Mahayana. So whether it's transmigrating from not being on a path to attaining a path, or progression through the paths, or just from a good rebirth to another good rebirth.
지가 라마들이야 동의 냠는 섬단도 도시하고 해야 되다 체포해야 시고를 제사당은 저기 기위 다시 사례에 선배게 무슨 중요도 다 다르려야 돼 소식이 기위 근데 지기지마 다야도 최고 부여라서 소식이 유지되기 파자상 현야도 지금 최고 부여다 지마 다라서 봐지네 아니 개와사 내가 보사 보게도 내내 아니 개와사 봐들래 되네 개와치마이네 대야보게다 장 이제 장유심 냠는 지토버 용어쇼 산내산 요거 봐 뉴도 토버쇼 세베 몰람자가다 몰람이도 아 되네 진짜 도신다 지코와라게 규차상 녀모버 레다 녀모마데 녀모마데 다세 마리바티 다세 마리바도 방고도 선배 방기 선배다 되네 삼들 순지면도 아 되네 진다 당에 되네게 다지게 장주심 냠면 다 동반이 검토바 지기 세배다 삼다디 펜배도 되네 마드네 소소라는 게 되네 두스톱게 되네 다슴자 담저서 산요고 번토버쇼 세배 장주심 두 쇼검제다 봐 지금 로예바마 살샤티네 라바예바고 하는 두신 단 니네다 니르다 시엘레파 다 두신에 두신 장주심 검제 시도베이나 Dine, Jesan Domwe Tone, Jan Taba Chimbu, Domwe Yamlin Chibu Tone, and Sepueva, so Jesan Teshin Pue, Damani, Doma Niki, Julam Jews, Jesan Julam Jews, and the Nitan, the Dusin, the Nijin, Dusin, some Dusin, Yen, Dusin, Shiru, yes, Jesan Dini. And Comia de la Janshism Combat, Donny Combayung, Tusin, Donny Gum Tubaina, that Donny Dohen give me, Yamle, you can get Donny Combala Sopatus Chebaina, Dine Comgendine, Chisan, Anzina, Lama, give what Tambatia Pa, Kuzi Pedicala, Tudam shoes at Jungo, or Dinica blood, Tulum shoes at the Jungore. Similar, Damsen do send Geshe called Setting Mapa by Zanyam, Zichi to do by the local Dam said that I took Dam said to depart them to do dirty what's your rod. That was so done, I don't want some Doma, don't want some mother Jabba Simadonna, don't buy double Logina, the Nigo Yungo there.
Then to repeat the 5 powers, how to practice the order to practice them at the time of death. So as one's death is approaching, then one starts. So the first of the 5 powers, one doesn't leave till the last moment, ideally, but in the lead up to one's impending death, one engages in the first, the power of virtuous seeds. So that's literal, but it really is about accumulating virtuous karmic imprints. So this most commonly will be done through the practice of generosity, of dispersing one's material possessions. And so one will make offerings to the Lama, the 3 jewels, one's family, and so forth. So one makes offerings as one's death is approaching, and this way accumulates virtue. So that's the first of the 5 powers at the time of death. Then the second, so this is a different order from earlier, the practicing in your life, but now at the time of death. And the second is the power of prayer and dedication. So here one is generating a particular aspiration in relation to the bodhisattva. So one makes prayers in accordance with the mind of bodhicitta, that one continues to progress life to life, meet one's spiritual friend, continues to place the needs of others first and foremost, comes to realize emptiness, and so forth. One's making prayers in accordance with a Mahayana ideal. So that's the second, the power of prayer and dedication. Then the third is the power of revulsion. So this is where one directs one's attention to one's afflictions. I will not allow myself to come under their influence. And in particular, this ignorance of self-grasping, I will abandon. Now, depending on the level of practitioner, they could be making through this power of revulsion, the determined attitude, now in the death process, I'm going to abandon it. But for ourselves, it would be more in relation to setting the determined attitude for lives to come. Then, so that's the power of revulsion, then the power of resolve. So this one is where one resolves to meditate, to continue to train in bodhicitta and emptiness. One strengthens his determination, and then that's the fourth. Then the fifth, one does so, the power of familiarization. So in dependence on the familiarization one has with meditations on bodhicitta and emptiness, one now meditates on bodhicitta and emptiness. So this is now the time of death. And for most practitioners, at this point, they will be lying on their right side. And here, depending on one's level of realization, one then passes from this life to the next. So one passes from this life to the next with whatever quality of understanding one has of bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness. For those who have actually realized emptiness, whether it's an inferential or direct realization, they would, at this point, abide in the Thubten meditation. So I was going to then can explain this word Thubten. So it would, I don't know how to translate it. Anyway, so there's two parts. Thuk, which is the honorific for mind, And then dam means here to abide or to abide stably. So abiding stably, and then there's the honorific word for mind. So this would refer to abiding in the realization of emptiness conjoined with bodhicitta. So for someone who has in that or previous lifetime realized emptiness, inferentially or directly, they will then utilize the death process to deepen their realization of emptiness.
이마신이엘레 아주 동반이고 삼는 제바제 냠내 삼다고 전에 다시 마시 갈라강섬로 제바제 야고라지나 동유 마도바 이나야 제바 냠낸 제제 동유고 삼도 전에 아 지게 장도를 시하고 태와나 돈이 또 매네 되게 다시 뒤급려야 되게 동의 전에 냠내지네 동반이 공부에서 가라마 지 동반이 삼도도 전에 되면 펜비도 당연히 갑로다 이제 동반이 또 도버 지기 동반이 공기 있으면 펜비도 두스게 되는 시뒤가를 동반이를 지지도 삼다 동반이 또 매배 가서 들었다 동반이 삼다도 전에 직시로베나 되네 아주기 시비 내가기 다 치심 참모세도 셈난의 차쇼치리아 준 거래 디가서 돈이 오서 또봐 돈이 또 도봐 용 거래 해서래 용 되는 용 거래서
These 5 powers are to be practiced throughout one's lifetime. And at the time of death, one again practices them. Only difference will be the sequence. And for those who have really developed remarkable qualities within, including a realization of emptiness, they will practice these same 5 powers as the rest of us will. But when they are coming to the third, that or the power of revulsion, they are they're identifying what they are now going to strive ever further to abandon, the ignorance of self-grasping. And then the fourth, the power of resolve, this is what I'm about to do. I'm determined that with this motivation of bodhicitta conjoined with my realization of emptiness, I am now going to realize emptiness. And then the fifth, then independence on this lifetime or probably lifetimes of meditation, they do so. So when the death process then comes, is underway, the coarser consciousnesses dissolve into the subtler consciousnesses, and eventually the subtlest consciousness is manifest. Skilled practitioner will recognize this subtle consciousness, and with that consciousness, they will realize emptiness. So as the coarser consciousnesses are dissolving, subtler consciousnesses are now manifest. And with this subtlest consciousness, when it becomes manifest, this will become the consciousness with which they realize emptiness. So this then is how the most skilled of practitioners greet the end of their life.
지단 태버 동의 냠는 제시 다디네 안 동의 냠는데 소속이 다시가 라모도 신의 삼당원데 동무한테 세지도 파지시네 동 제는 데 지시가 라모도 삼당 오래서 지금 쉬바래 시로체디 대신 뒤로 시가 라마스네 시로체도 삼당네 시로시가 삼당 오래서 디마 쉬버로 다 인지민지 되네 그거 말에 아 저게 니마고 니쿠에 갑려야 단 니쿠 니 만이가래 니로체도 동네 돈에 냠는 제 용거래 니마고 마이니야 동네 돈에 냠는 제 니쿠에 용거래 니가 용거래서는 니마고 단 니에게 견삼들다 만이냐야 안 지게 소수게 라마다 이담나 산길이야 대바지도 제 안에 지게 안 될이야 안 지게 접수줘야다 되네기에는 지게 도시네 잠니지 삼야 샤리아 잠니지 삼야라서 봐 도시는 삼계위치 삼다면은 다디니 가보선에 사보이도 가보 개와사고로 와다 되네게 매년이야다 만이에 뒤슬리르스다 얘기인 삼배 삼nye 되되된 대담보 도시네 삼다디 가보사보이도 되네 되게 냠내지네 아니 지 잠니지 냠는지네야 아니 기디네 냠는지네 탈심부터 용을 쇼세야 이 냠는지네 심지어 탐지 산유고바 토버쇼 세베게 되네게 삼다베나 몰람자체 몰람도 제자당에 정말 라젠 참아 그 동안 역할에 윤규리 다세 마릭바리 다세 마릭바디 방구도 셈베게 삼다야디 아니 되네 순진베 돕제 다 펜베 돕세디 당연히 다시 말이 받을 방고 방에 된다리야 예 동반이 삼다 공기 세배 점리제 또 자주심 동반이 공기 세배 삼다에 대 편배도 없차고 와 나되네게 또 공부 삼제 되네 소수기 동반이 삼다에는 되네 니디가 봐 니디가 되네 최삼제 지게 강래야 지게 랑공원에 주바시 요말에 진짜 나와도 주바 싸우기는 매 아심 나와도 랑공원에 강래마 랑공원에 주베 다신 제베상 가야 니에 아 동상지마도 매 선배기 되네게 동반이 삼다도 제는 이후송와이나 되네 다디 태바치면 도구인 냠리게 토네 니 먹고와 아니 지게 셈 원조 옆에 되네 포에제네 일반 유해 다 도신 이후에 삼다면에 개월에 제가 되네게 갑려야 되네게 미 동이 도디가 가사에 옆에 있는 야디니 니 셰바디야 니 후여도다 니 셰바 오늘 교도 니 셰바 호랑 동요도 불용고 규제 냠는지 난줘봐 용고래 대소를 니 난줄을 냠바샤바 냠샤바서 니 난줄을 냠바샤바 제자다 권 마시비냐고 동이 마도바 동요 도여바 저 호랑 동요 공여바 되네게 이후에 다 되네게 이후에 니lâm 셰바데 동방이 도 불용고 규제 공바 용고래 제자당 안좀 동이 또 매나야 당아도 제 삼다면은 되네 예 니lâm 내가서 강 니디베 니비가 니지 내가 니지 셰바디야 개와차게 되죠 개와차고래 되네 니디가블이야 되네 장주심 삼다데 베네 펜베도 이 장주심 공기 선비 펜바다제 되네 니디가블이야 샘제 탐주산요고바 토벌쇼 샘베 삼다 니디베이나 되네 니쿠진 니 메시지 바라들라 개와디야 네 지금 개와차되어 그래서 제가 니 개와 제가 되네게 더네 한쪽에 동무에 냠는지 잡아쳔비게다 동무에 냠는지 지당은 가도 넘기네 되네게 냠는지 제 여바제 다 체포 위에 나가서 더 뒤에 도시는 삼단 냠는지 여바제 되네 소소님 지 년고를 해야 되네 다 예야 공다게 예에게 견삼들이 다 동기도 냠는지는 이거 여바데 도시는 소소게다 또 제토베나 되네게 차상지야 해야 되고 자고래
And this fourth point, called a summary of a lifetime's practice. The first point was about training in these 5 powers, and the second point is then how to apply them at the time of death. And I spoke about how various practitioners will, in particular, how great practitioners also will train or practice these same 5 powers at the time of death. So therefore, there's clearly great benefits in applying oneself to this lifetime's practice. And you can, if you feel a motivation to do so, you can add to this that one can also train in these at the time of going to sleep. In that, one can, in a sense, utilize your nightly sleep as preparation or practice for when the time of death comes. So during one's day, one practices in the sequence that was mentioned in the first point, but at the time of going to sleep, one practices in the sequence as mentioned in the second point, which is at the time of death. So therefore, if one wants to practice in this way, as one nears going to sleep, so it's not necessarily all in the last moment, but as one is approaching, okay, it's bedtime's coming, then one engages starts the process of 5 powers, and one concludes them as one goes to sleep. So one, and this is now in the sequence again of death. So one first engages in the power of virtuous seeds. And this is done in 2 folds. One is making supplications to one's Lama, Yidam, and Buddhas. And one generates love and compassion. So one cultivates love and compassion, and this is and makes supplications for blessings, for inspiration to one's Lama, Yidam, and the Buddhas. And this is the first of the 5 powers, that of the virtuous seed. So it's accumulating a merit. So that's the first. Then the second, the power of prayer and dedication. So here one is expressing one's aspiration that I am now going to engage in this practice so as to cultivate the Mahayana within, so I can be of great benefit to others, and so forth. So one is expressing one's aspiration in this way, and one can recite prayers and so forth. Then the third is the power of revulsion. So this follows on from one has now expressed one's aspiration, one's determination, and now one says, one's expressed one's aspiration in the second. Now in the third, one expresses one's revulsion. I've generated this aspiration because I want to abandon this ignorance of self-grasping. This ignorance that keeps me bound in suffering, and that limits me in being able to be of great benefit to others. So here one generates a power of revulsion. Then this leads neatly into the fourth, the power of resolve. And one resolves, I am going to meditate on bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness. So this resolve is strengthening one's determination in relation to what one has already generated now in one's preparation to go to sleep. So this is the fourth, the power of resolve. Now we come to lying down, and this is where one engages in the fifth power, the power of familiarization. So now one is lying down, and one turns one's mind to emptiness, one's understanding of emptiness, conjoined with one's motivation of bodhicitta. One sets the determined attitude, all that appears right now, as well as in my sleep, this phenomenon that appears to my mind does not exist in the way that it appears. It is empty of existing in the way that it appears. And it's empty of existing in the way that it appears. It requires imputation by mind. It requires causes such as the seeds that led to it to ripen, and so forth. And then finally, it can be likened to a dream, in that it does not exist in the way that it appears. So this is the meditation that you engage in, the meditation on emptiness, conjoined with your motivation on bodhicitta, and you fall asleep. And then for ordinary beings, that meditation will influence their sleep, in that virtue will be accumulated whilst they're asleep, because they are passing from the waking state into the dream state under the influence of virtuous minds. And therefore, their final consciousnesses are virtuous, and that will have an impact on how one sleeps, or the quality of one's mind while one sleeps, as well as the kind of mind you wake up with. Your mind is very likely to be turned immediately to virtue, arise with a virtuous mind. And for those who have actually realized emptiness, they will do this meditation at the time of sleep. The process of the 5 powers is identical. The quality of their various consciousnesses will differ from ourselves, but the process is the same. But whilst they are asleep, their real difference is apparent, in that they will actually realize that the various phenomena that are arising to their mind do not exist in the way they appear. So they will be engaging in dream yoga. They will be actually realizing emptiness. So for these yogins, they have already realized emptiness, and therefore they would have realized emptiness day after day after day, and night after night whilst asleep. So this is how they will practice, but we can practice in a way that is similar to that, and thereby accumulate extensive virtue and gain deep habituation to this meditation to be applied at the time of death.
제사다 개와다 미고 농부 숨바세디 개와스 가리고 거스네 안제 니 쿠위 갑리야 개위 섬로시 땅제 안두 제네 지 개위 섬로 땅시베디 안에 니후 송와이나 디니디 개와 차르고 니 시바디 개와 차르고 다야 지 니후 마원이야 지게 되차다 현야 체외 뇌비 섬로로 두 코르제 디 섬로 땅신병 안에 니후 송와이나 니 미가 차르고 그래서 니 마원이기 미로와 Dinigi that kind of mebache, no so legado, dinero to get work some like me give some like I never do some the nihus, the needy, ni sheba the Gawa and Maramigo Maluma said, do she ni horon, share the Gawa and Migo Luma and Sumi or said, do she shall
At the very least, I encourage you to take from what I've just presented that at the time of going to sleep, it's important that I generate a virtuous mind. Because if one generates a virtuous mind, that virtuous mind will continue into one's sleep and one will accumulate merit. And if one has developed a strong virtuous mind, one will accumulate a lot of merit and it will last hopefully throughout one's sleep and you'll rise with it. So this, I encourage you then to take that understanding and to apply it. Conversely, for people who go to sleep with negative thoughts, maybe they're upset about something, they go to sleep with their mind complaining about something. So they have a negative mind, an afflicted mind. They're upset, or they're deeply attached to something. Their mind is non-virtuous at the time of going to sleep, and that will impact their mind during sleep and have impact the karma accumulated. And for others, perhaps most common, going to bed with a neutral mind. So the mind is really on today's activities, tomorrow's activities. So it's not particularly engaged. It's not afflicted nor virtuous. Then one will sleep and neither non-virtue nor virtue will be accumulated.
Ondusine, that Zidane, Yamdushin, Nimigolia, Dushin, Domi, Yamneja, Yoba, that's what the Sepola make the Domi, Yamneja, Sepoya. Then you go alam, Nimo, the Niku, Nerabia, Domi, Yamneja, Nikuya, Soba, or Dushin and Juge, that Jiggy, the Nigi, Yamneja, Tuina, Manzulia Dusine. Gajitone, Chasan to Chichi, by Chagorwa, and then Niki gave out to you the Nigga some time and they gave out to you Niku, Nimo, go a Divico like Yavasaya, Niku and a Kawasai, Yungurwada, in a down to Dinigi, Nanjulia, Gomshi made you. Gomji made you the nigger that she tweeted a home to what Bendigo at the name that the young how go by ne, then you earlier, Zinang magic could. Gabriele Petica Corsorida, Deniki, some don't give you some Tama Imache, then you who or Gomshi Mer, what she's not down to Dan, Shatan Chiparida, at the Deniki, Shingo, the Dening Yaman Chit course and the Yungo Mare, then you could come that in the Yungo Mare, she's not down to the Sosu Ganazuki, Gomdi maybe, Guen Chagora, she's not down to Lucian, Deniki, Gomdin Timba another. There's a Sarajik in each and the nation dinner, go Yaketa and Chagro, Chisande Junior Chamber, Kaza Shuba Nashi, Gomna Lava Mugu, Mobokaya, Yama Sadi, Roa, Chesa Sosuki, Yaman, Shunjun, Yaman Chigi, Yam Church, Toture, Sadi, what is that? This only Bejic, 6 Nima to Minute, in it, the Dona, sometime Bejuchi Damena, Bemas a Yachimbo, Pando Chimbu Shooting and Chagoroa. She's a rangi in Yaman Che. That's and me as a 20 year can, and Deva you can, and Rangi Pa, consolation, conjugate the Niggy Yamlin Jag, Deva you say, somebody, and so you can Yamlin in the Sheba Shimpadi, consul out to Chinia, or said Pashi and Shell Pingo, what the Nigger go up down and just give Yamlin Jag, you do about the Chagore. Pajudelia, Doya, American, Anti Rangi, singing Dodo, Paju, Doya, Matajuk, Shushan idea, well, Mare. Rangi, Singu, Dodo, Pajudele, Doya, Matache, so Aduchi or Denis, the Yahweh session, and Dia, Tata Chago Mare.
what we have presented thus far in the first of the 7 points is how to cultivate the foundation so that one can actually generate the minds of the Mahayana. And in the second point, we had how to cultivate those minds. And then the third was about using it skillfully in our daily encounters, in our challenging encounters. And here we have a summary of that in presenting how to practice throughout one's life. And I've presented how you practice during the day. I've now presented how you practice at the time of going to sleep as training for practicing when the end of this life comes. So I encourage you to take whatever motivation you have and try and apply this throughout your life. This is essential. You've had an opportunity, you've come together, engaging in meditation, gaining experience of how to do these meditations. So I encourage you to continue to do so. Do so today in your sessions, as well as tonight, and going forward from when you return home at the end of our time together. So I encourage you to do so and to take heart that no matter how new this is to you or how deeply or slightly habituated you are to this, habituation comes. By trying, slowly it comes. And again, I'll repeat the verse from Shantideva's Patience chapter, the 14th verse. There is nothing at all that does not become easier through familiarization. Thus, through familiarity with minor challenges, great challenges will patiently be borne. So the meaning is quite clear, that by gaining familiarity in our time together and continuing to build that familiarity as best you can, not leaving it on retreat, this will start to become your habituation, part of your personality. So I encourage you in this way to make the most of this. All that being said, I don't want to be sitting up here talking down to you as if I'm a living example of everything. I do my best. I try. There's some areas I practice. I feel I'm doing a bit better. There are many others I need to do a whole lot better. So I don't want to talk as if I'm able to do all of this in an exemplary manner. But I'm trying. I do what I can, and I try and build up my habituation. So I encourage you in this way to join me on this journey. One, by being honest with where we are, as I am being with myself, and knowing that by continuing, slowly the habituation grows, and what before seemed impossible now seems achievable, and before what seemed achievable, now you are actually doing. So I encourage you in this way.
Yeah. 다 로종 되수 냠nen진의 로종 제 냠nen 집이 돈에 제다 다 로종비 체로 지간의 시에서디 다 대가봐 안저 로종의 체에서 디고 마셔야래.
Having thereby concluded the fourth point, we come to the fifth, the measure of having trained the mind.
다되네 지텔이야 최근 공부 지도 뒤스
The first of the four sub-points, all teachings come down to a single purpose.
다 최근 공부 지도 뒤세디다 나 가르스모르스네 당한 저기 최대 상기기 최 태바 챔비기 최세당 태바 중유 최세디 되게 최 근데 뭐 송여봐 제자들이 자다가 저 태바 챔비기 최념내 지안저 다이티 가운데 셰바 태바 챔비 잠니제다 되게 동반 이거 삼다 도스 념내 지유에서 되게 념내 제네 단 념내 지유여 봐체 소소 념내 지유여 봐체 된 념내 제네 아다 소소로 저다 당아 태바 챔비 최지에 이 세상당 안주도 배야고이 다 태매 제 최신 제제자 상기 유순 태원기 최순에 되게 된아저 롭자 마신나 되기래 이런 저 시야고야 요 말에 나중에 다 잡아치면 손실을 취념에 지고치는 되기래 돼 맞을 맞지다 태명기 최선시에 최되게 판도시라요 말했습니다. 지다다 두신의 삼담에는 되네 안에 로종기 다다 차요 말해 로종야 뭐 차요 말해서 그러다.
This points called the measure of having trained the mind. And it is, we'll refer to having trained the mind in the Buddha Dharma. And the teachings of the Buddha are divided into two general parts, or two general groups, one being that of the Theravada and one being that of the Mahayana. So for ourselves, our aspiration is to enter into the Mahayana, to cultivate it within us, and to fulfill the aspirations of the Mahayana. So this is our aspiration. And as part of the measure as to whether one has trained one's mind successfully or not, we should look at how we genuinely think about those who aspire to engage in the Theravadan teachings, who aspire to their paths or are cultivating their paths, striving for the goals of the Theravada. If we have an attitude towards them that is condescending, that sees their aspirations, their goals, their trainings as their practices as inferior, and thereby ours and oneself as superior, this is an impediment to mind training. This attitude is an impediment to mind training.
제산 상기기 최송제 태바침의 최 토요tem의 최 아니지 내내 숨라서바 가르시네 상기 숨비 최 공부 타도디 안주기게 코와를 코에 유 다지 마리바티기 반 년보 송고야 띵고레스 제산 내내기 다슨 태바침의 최 가르시네 내내 숨라서 가르시면은 저희 미유 상기기다 안주 코에 유 동아요에게 규소와 다지 마리비 년보 디 본거바디 디 년보디 띵고레 삼바제 하고 바이나 하고 오래서 되는 거 바이나 대파침의 취 냠는디 상기 송비 취 강직 아니 차산 타도 상기 고번 토비게 람냠니 심바 템바디 고투고 오래서다 되는 공부 직세서 최근 공부 직도 뒤세대 상기 송비 취 간의 힘네 대파치 중의 취 되는 송비 취 간의 힘네 타도 안에 공부하되 가르스는 샘전 탐조 코르 동아요에 유 다제 마리바디 뽕에게 님보대야다 다제 마레바데 타르 제 뽕지는 타르바토야다 코르 동아를 줘야다 타도 상기 고마 토비게 송바 직바레 하고 바나 최근 공부 직도 뒤세 안디 되네 하고 가지고 그래스.
So therefore one should be very clear that every teaching the Buddha gave, whether it's categorized amongst those of the Theravada or those amongst the Mahayana, shares a single purpose: to lead all beings to gain liberation from suffering. And how to do so? Through recognizing sufferings and their origin, with at the root origin of suffering, the ignorance of self-grasping. Therefore, both vehicles, we should understand clearly, present this. They present how to recognize the root cause of our suffering and the antidote to that, the cultivation of the wisdom realizing emptiness. Therefore, the entirety of the Buddha Dharma, all teachings, come down to a single purpose, which is, by means of these teachings, to beings to be guided to attain their own liberation from suffering.
제사당 계신 원로다 무시든지 시위 qab려야 제사다 대주류 대주게 된 채와 삼다다 미다바 삼당고 그래 아니 코르베 동아 삼지 될야 다르게 삼바기 고래 아니지 니젤야 잠니지 공고래 진짜 자주스 뭐 동반이 공고래지만 뒤송과 제사는 저 qab려 되니까 미다바 거선 가 태바치 미치냐면지 미다바 거선다 코르이가 송고 삼다디 직 타바상에 디디 삼당고요 말에 다 태바침이 취 호랑지 분냠네 지산 지게 디서 태바침이 취 냠네 제발라 거예요 말씀 배삼로 콜시고로 받아 내가 태바침이 취 지게 이 태바메 태면의 손시베기 취에들에 내가 로브라 제고요 말씀 베기 내가야 태바침이 취 냠네 제발라 디서 거예요 판도요 말씀 베가 삼로 요시고래 제자디 판도 유대 바래 지와 아주 den주 밀리리 뭐치다 지와 메타바 삼다야다 데네게 아니 코위에 가서 동안 데네게 삼다야디게 제정 원로에 태바침에 쉐념는 제야 유 원로에 탑시 탑람에 제상 제선 냠는 제발에 데네 잠니지게 해야 용고래서 제상 잠니지게 낸도마인도 비셔라 냠 태바침에 쉐념는 제 용고래 제상 타도디 메타바 템바나다 동하게 라신 템바다 동할 주베 탑람 템바데 차상 탈도 상이고마 토베시도 또하다 상이고바데 가르서는 내가 대화자 마이엠바 탈바토고 탈바디안 탈바토가 정지고 탈바톱나 다주메지고 톱나 시시 디베니모 바차 빠야마 디오무 주와모 무용고로 봐 제산다 상기고바 탈도데 섬전 탐지 코유 동아 교 녀모 바차네 제바 빵제 상이고바 토야디 딜미크제네 다데니 마 탑람네 림발 마선 림발 송고로 봐 제산 차자다 미유 상이기 태바 치중유 취 되디 데네 숨라서 취 강송바 미다바 동아와라서 바다 다음에 바 가르송베네 차상 탈도 미유디 셈젠타제 상이고바 토비치 송고래 제산다 태바치메 취 간에 치중 취 간에 이나 상이기 공바 탈도디 상이고바 토비치 인사바데 데네 송고라서 데네기 하고 토바이나 공부 지도 뒤세 최근 공부 지도 뒤 되니가 하고 토바이나 디고고 태바치면 최냠는 제비게 되니지 고바이나 태바치면 최냠는지 야고 연구에 따라서 그래.
Holding in mind what we started, when we started to look at the very first point, what we're looking at there, and now what is being presented with this first sub-point here for the measure of having trained one's mind, shows that it's imperative that we engage in these various trainings. So let me restate this. So when we started looking at this text, we started looking at the preliminary practices, which have this preparatory practice for each session, and then there are two sets of preliminaries: precious human rebirth, impermanence, as well as the sufferings of samsara, come to know them through true sufferings and true origins. Thereafter, one, having built this foundation, then engages in the main practice of the Mahayana, love, compassion, and wisdom. So I really hope through what has been presented then and as well as later that it's very clear why it's indispensable that one trains in the preliminary practices and does not follow the misguided thoughts that can arise all too easily. I'm a Mahayanist. Why do I need to reflect on impermanence? This is something that is taught by the Buddha and done by in many Buddhist communities, but I'm a Mahayanist. My focus is on developing bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness. I really hope that it's abundantly clear that this way of thinking is deeply mistaken, because the trainings which are shared amongst all practitioners, whether of the hero solitary realizer type or the bodhisattva type, what's shared amongst them is those foundational trainings upon which the Mahayana is built. If that foundation is lacking, the structure of the Mahayana cannot come about. And the foundation is weak. If one's training there is wishy-washy, the Mahayana will not come about. So the entirety of the Buddha's teachings, you could express their purpose as this: to bring about an end of suffering. And at the very least, to bring about some temporary happiness, attained through a bit more mental peace in this life and another good rebirth. That's the minimal purpose of the Buddha Dharma. But the greater purpose is a complete cessation of suffering and the attainment of lasting happiness. And for some, This will be done by means of their own individual liberation, and then much later, striving for Buddhahood. For others, they'll be striving for Buddhahood from the outset, and by means, or thereby, attain a cessation of their suffering. Both streams follow the same process of abandoning the afflictions together with their seeds. And to do so, it's imperative, as we saw in the preliminaries, to train in this incredible opportunity, recognize its impermanence, and deepen this understanding of impermanence when one reflects on the suffering of samsara and comes to recognize the suffering of the subtler levels of suffering, and recognize the subtle impermanence, and thereby give rise to the determined attitude to gain liberation from suffering, or compounded suffering, or pervasive suffering, this one. So this is foundational for both vehicles, or this is indispensable rather for both vehicles. And it is the foundation upon which love, compassion, and bodhicitta are built. So I hope this is abundantly clear to everyone. And if one trains in this way, one's training the Mahayana will go well, and one will have the skills to be able to benefit those who are inclined to the Theravada trainings. And one will not have a condescending view for them, but because of one's compassion, one will guide them in accordance with their capacity.
태바침비게 산지고번 탈도 산지고번 토비게 탑람 템바샤다레서 디네게 네바니 토바직제 디네 다랑기 최념는 가르체베나 기위 자와 가르체베네야 다진지 다세 마리베 님보 송아지고 그래서 디네게다 태바침비 디네스음 가네시네 탈도 산지 요고번 토와치 송바 지규레 산비게 네바니 직제 소속의 기위 냠는 최 가르체베나 디네 최지베 개와디게 차상 다신 마리베 님보지 조토바지 디네게 요바이나다 디네 주나 된 태바침비 최 냠는 로정대지양서 로정제베게다 로정의 체리에서 로정의 딸에서다.
The measure for one having measure of having entered into the training of the Mahayana for ourselves would be that one has recognized that the root cause of all our suffering is ignorance of self-grasping, and that I have to abandon this and do so for the sake of all beings in order to achieve my ultimate goal, my final goal of Buddhahood. So one, again, to repeat this, has recognized that the sole reason or the root cause of suffering is ignorance of self-grasping. It's not others, it's not circumstances, it's this very ignorance. Therefore, I must apply myself to abandon it through the accumulation of virtue in order to be of greatest benefit to all beings. So this is the measure of oneself, having trained the mind.
이사단 태바침비게 취지기에서 냠는 지기에서 소속이 태바침을 취리야 도나제 돈예제 데네 로정아제 데네 지네다 데네 지어 당한테 태바침비 취선 배고 산유고바 투주 송바리 다 태만에 소야 취디게다 탈바좀 토여 송여 송아리 제사다 먼저 거예요 말씀이 데네기 삼담베네 다다차고 말해서 로정한테 태바침이 취냐 로정 다다리고 말해서 안디 맞아 한치 소속이 태바침에 취지기에서는 취지기 앞에 장주스모 동반이 삼다 태바침에 취냐면 지기에서 아니 견주지기가 말씀 생각하게 알아서 받아 아니 소속이 담년도 영역이 디네 삼다베는 태바 취지기를 취지해야 되기 될이야 아니 지 묘모기에 파 차결 파비셔 땅도 아니 지 뭐야게 하다 아니 지게 안지게 담년도 돼야다 디네기 송요도 안디 태바침이 취념는 지기가 라나 말하네 태바침이 취념는 세다 된바디 용고 말해서 그러다가 제가 도시는 제가 데네시 중 봐이나 용고 말 제가 데네자 태바침이 취념는 지죠 달 냠는 따다의 용고 말해서 제가다 냠는 따다 중지로 종와 따다 중국의 체로 지간에서 데네시 중 봐이나 아니 태바침이 가리 때문에 탈도 산지 고방치도 송이 덴베치도 토베치 송바 임바데 방해바니 엔디네 캬바치 최강라이네 술이네 안지 구시압다 안 구구 지고제야다 안지게 안디시야 안지 소소게 최가르 제베네 최지게 냠네 가르 제베네 뇽몽바 덴제 마릭비 님보 조투바지 뇽몽바 마기와 뇽몽비 님보 조투바지 중바이나 되네게 전다 다 로차바치면 로종 냠네 제베 로종의 세대 중화래 되네 야보레스 월드.
So therefore, the measure of one having trained one's mind in this regard is having given rise to a genuine aspiration for Buddhahood. So to tie to what was then just said, when one recognizes that the reason I suffer is ignorance of self-grasping, I have to abandon that so that I can guide others to gain freedom too. So this then means one has a genuine aspiration for Buddhahood. With such an aspiration, if we also then think, these other Buddhists who engage in this other form of Buddhism, theirs isn't as great as mine. If one has the sense of condescension towards them, or towards their trainings that they engage in, one has not given rise to a genuine aspiration for Buddhahood. Because what one in fact is doing is engaging in strengthening one's afflictions, the 8 worldly concerns too, in that one will have a wish to be seen as a Mahayanist. I am a bit great. I'm a little special. Amongst Buddhists, I'm in the greater group, the better group, not those of the lesser group. So there, with us, you can hear the expression of pride and condescension. So how can one say one is genuinely striving for Buddhahood if when one of one's views is one that is so afflicted? And of course, as part of aspiring for Buddhahood, comes from reflecting deeply on the kindness of others, developing a deep sense of closeness, tenderness towards others. This will mean one values others, one sees their worth, their value. This means one will respect others. When one values others and thereby respects them, one will not condescend them. Have a condescending attitude. One will have a caring attitude, a warmth towards them. One will want the best for them, but one will not condescend on them, look down on them. So therefore, if one thinks one has an aspiration for Buddhahood, but one sees that one has these other afflicted views, then no, you need to abandon these. They are an impediment to your actual cultivation of mind training.
아니네기 아도세 제사당은 저 도스네 로정외체 되네래야지. 제사는 저 지도 나라 용거를 빼는 거는 저게 당은 네 베기나데네 geloopada 님마다 안사야단 그 유세데 제수기미 냠내 야보지가 저기 차상 안 차상을 90제다 튼데제야데 용거래. 아지게 소수의 냠낸 지구에서가 일부인세 당한 님마에서 냠낸 지구에서 민디케 니수의 최기 내다의 약고 마신도 되네 아가지 님마인 일부를 지지하고 말지 지지하고 말해야 먼저 일부는 님미디 지지하고 말 약고 말 되네게 파도시에 지가다의 견주 체베는 가리는 추유 가르토는 냠낸체는 냠낸의 야보 중 신금에 받아 야보 매배 다래다 제사단 소수의 추유 가리는 냠낸제 야보지 연구여반은 제해져 있나? 되니게 차상래야 구구 90제마도 견제제하다디 연구 말했어.
And similarly, if we take within our Tibetan tradition, there are the 4 different traditions. Here, if one feels my group are best, the focus of, in our case, the Guluk, this is best. This is the very best way to attain the goals of the Dharma. And therefore, the others, not quite the same, not as good. This is, again, an expression of condescension. Will probably rise in a way that's a bit stronger than I'm saying, but it's an expression of condescension, of arrogance. And if one has this view that sees one's own tradition as best, Gelugpa is best, Nyingma is best, non-sectarian is best, whatever it may be, if one sees one's own as better, or if one's expression is, are the others just not so good, they have mistakes, then this that view is an impediment to your practice going well. So this wrong way of thinking will be an impediment to the success of your training. Rather, one should have genuine respect for the other traditions. Your inclination may well be with a single tradition, or maybe more than one, whatever, but that doesn't mean everyone has to practice in accordance with your inclination. Again, it's an expression of arrogance. So therefore, where you see these views within yourself, recognize that they are wrong and abandon them. This then removes an impediment to the success of one's own training.
여름식이 그디네 안저 출룩세디 튼데하고 거래스 지산 출룩디 안저 최대 야고를 콘주 최대 야고 말에서도 균주에 되는 제베나 안디기 안줄야 대 출룩레레 제담이 멍부여로 왔다네 지산 디기 토네 미축바제 마팀바 강한 요라 멍불리고레스 지산 디네 인자 출룩디 튼데하고 거래스 지지리야 출룩수도 수이네 지지를 구지 최 디단디 제다 마제데 소소기 되바레스 이난 구십 제고레스 ane da jige sosu ge chulu kane chi ne ya chösuya di ji koran ju ge chi duja de ge ya digi ya da mi yu zo digi ju ya da gang a se ye don da sung go was 제가 다 chulu chasa mi yu chi ba de res 그래서 digi ju ya da gang dung a se ya da digi ju ya su sung go res 제가 dine inza ane chi chi ya 지게 균죄제다 마가와제디 아니 튜문배 바자 가지고 믿음 바차나 철로 균죄제나 디 미디기 믿음 바자 되는 요라만 몰리게 돼서 제가 디네자 소수수 철로를 튜죄제 튜문하고 소수수수 주시네 내려 구구제 구십제 최제단 뒤최제단 맞이돼 소소라 되바래 구십제 오래스 제가 출이 튜류하고 하나 가서 점례는 미디기 튜류하고 디 계치 뭐시 오래 샤세 양주 철로 튜류하네 다 그디는 예마도와는 양주다 사람 몽부 베네 가체당 힌두당 예수당 데네게 안에 나와든데 라신디게 봐 좀지 안에 먼저 두신 좀 지게 튼디고도 제자데 두신에 봐 아니 제초제 나는 거르주기 다 수술하는 게 출루토네 지디 유튜브다 동아 세타 데네게 토네 안지 람든 랍제 야고디게 두신 봐 줘도제 데네지 두신 망보난 거래 나자 제자 경험치기다 데네게 제바이나 아주가 라마 쪼디게 라마디게 봐 튠보샤 데네 주변에 니기 전주디게 미마디기나 철지치를 견주 마시고 튠보용 거래 데네 튠보마다 아주 튠보여반다 점리디기 용 거래스 세상 디기 용야게 디 자긴지 먼저 디 고걸 제사 출로 튼리제 오래서 이제 송고래 여름지대네 가와도네 페베네 가지라가나 페이스네 가지라가나 페이지인데 가지샤모디게 취해진 보도스네 아니 가지 코로나 취해지다 난지는 어찌 뭐람 난 거래 단 힌두라가나는 힌두교 걸 가르치는 도시인데 코로나 나진 90제 되고 라가나 지에다 도시는 거래 예수를 도시는 거래 제가 여름제 라마 가지면 제가 어디 가지는데 힌두라가나 균의 죽음에 생비게 따와 차고 다 낭비라가나 죽음에 가지라가나 죽음에 세디 디오로다 제가 디 여름제기 가와네 되니게 튼디에 토네 배식 차상 염주 제주 도시는 난거 제가 주로 튼디에 요하다 되니게 좀네 된 라친디게 좀제 튼디게 교시요도 라신기에는 튼부 용도에 차고로 제가 여름제 배 마시기 되게 전부 제시도 주로 튼디 세디 도시네 난거래
His Holiness, as I just said, speaks about the need for harmony between the various Tibetan traditions as well as harmony between religions. And the way that he says harmony is to be created is by us not having a critical attitude or a condescending attitude towards other religions. but rather to have a genuinely respectful attitude towards other religions, for the simple reason that those religions have as their purpose to bring good to the world, in particular to their followers. So the purpose of those religions is to bring good, to bring happiness, and that makes them worthy of respect. And on the other side of the argument would be that if one doesn't have respect, if one has a condescending attitude, a critical, dismissive attitude, this will lead to disharmony between religious practitioners, and from this, only harm will follow. Or if that disharmony is expressed in competitiveness, ours is best, this is the one you should follow, again, only harm follows. So His Holiness, you will have seen, he has many times throughout the decades had gatherings, orchestrated gatherings between various religious traditions, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, Jewish, and others, so as to foster harmony, and that he can set an example to those in the Tibetan tradition, as well as to be gathered by religious leaders from other religions to set an example to their followers. So this we should hold in mind and follow that example. And we should follow it in relation to sectarian attitudes within Tibetan Buddhism, negative attitudes towards other religious traditions, and in general, not to hold critical views of others, not to criticize others for not having my disposition, my karmic imprints, and therefore seeing things in the way that I do. So rather, we should develop the general attitude of holding all beings as dear, no matter how they express their karmic dispositions. For example, following one particular religion as opposed to another, or of no religion. And His Holiness lives this example. When he travels, or when he traveled, he would never express the attitude of, I'm not going into a mosque, you'll never see me inside a shul or a church or a temple. Not at all. Quite the opposite. He'd go in, he'd be respectful, he'd make prayers for interreligious harmony, and if he was asked to wear some religious garments, often a hat, he would happily do so, and we've seen these photographs. And he does so to set an example. And it's not necessarily that we should follow that physical behavior, but it's that attitude of holding all beings dear, which will lead to a respect for others.
여름지 샤무다 말아주고 that means 수샤무디 부인에 같이 가까블레 같이 샤무 같이 같이 샤무를 같이 샤무 줘야다. 이 힌두다 반자바다 되니기 샤무 줘야라서 바다. 되니기 안도시네 출루 다 말하게 전부도 염치디 최고래. 안디 멤비게다 맞는 민지양게 아주 미자고야 샤무 캡스야 되네 고야라서 바다 되니기 샤무 고야라서 바다 아니 지금 미 루무서스기 징슝기 샤무로서 두시도 차상 쉬고 염치 돈다 가르sun 거래 염치기 디 최대 김세지요래 다 염치 최대 가르 된다랑 안줄 가르 뛴 거래서네 가르 하고 거래서 돼 안줄 출루셔야 돼다 철루기 개발 말해서 그렇다 다 철루 가르 그러면 같이 잡고 공부하는 같이 주고 말해서 힌두 잡고 보면 힌두 주고 말해서 니말라메 잡고 보면 니마 주고 말해서 다 미자 샤머 주고는 미자 차기 말해서 제가 다치 딱이 샤머 딱이 소수기 디 주고스 가요 말해서 칠로야 가르 공부이네 낭삼로디 소소랑기 잠니제 자주셈 냠는 안 랍주네 도모소에 냠는 제대로이나 다 가르고면에 나중에 개발 가요 말 돈다 저어디 최 가르치면서 낭삼류 돈에 야와 최고래 해서 그래 제가 먼저 지도가 나를 되는게 한 먹어도 어다고 같이 잡 먹어줘 꼭 같이 이래서 꼭 같이 잡 먹은 것도 와서야 아니 어다고 지금 힌두를 시작해서 힌두의 반접을 지지 권도 와서 어다고 님마스 님을 남이 샤모를 권도 와서 데리고 gelub이 샤모 권도 두로 권도 람나 먼저 야와지를 두로들 때에 야와체 차고로 와 이 나로게 냠는 가르쳐봐도 한 먹고 따라와. 그래서 다 출력이 개발이 그래서 소식이 낭 삼류트네 냠는 지야들 라리고 마도 치 따로 디난디기 캐버게 치도 말에 그 같이 잠뭐 주고 맨날 같이 차와다 같이 그 야보 신빙해 봐요 말에 제사당은 저 낭비게 길루비게 다 되네게 제라미게 잠뭐 지부로 건배나 소소 낭 유대되네 유빙해 봐요 말에 제사디 치 따치루트네 디난디 말 에와 체리가 말데 캐버스가 말에서 donda zo susugi nang samlu tune nyale yabo chi kuguri es ngorda denigi na dasan ro chi daru yumje ro chi dene chi go for nga joge chesa dine re
I'm sure you have all seen photos on the internet of His Holiness wearing a wide variety of hats. So he'll be wearing hats from probably every religious tradition that exists, as well as hats that are in accordance with culture. You may remember him years ago when he was teaching in big auditoriums. He would wear a peak cap to protect his eye from the sun. He wasn't sitting on a throne saying, no, I'm too grand, too important, too holy to wear a cap. No, happily do it, not a problem. Likewise, when he went to, say, Mexico, you've seen the pictures of him with a big sombrero on. Or there would have been pictures with him with baseball caps on. Or in India, there are many caps in the different regions. So in accordance with culture, he would wear them. And if it was required in religious temples, he would wear their particular religious garb. So through this, he's making some very clear statements that for ourselves as students of His Holiness, we should try to take to heart. Firstly, our focus needs to be on transforming our mind and expressing these virtuous minds that we are cultivating in a way that brings benefit. With the process of transforming our mind, we're developing our wisdom, our intelligence. This should aid us to understand what is important and what is not, and what in certain circumstances is important and what is not. And with this understanding then, act in accordance with the needs of beings, act in accordance with what will bring them benefit and cause no harm. So therefore, one shouldn't have an attitude of, I won't enter into a mosque or a shul or a church or a temple, or if I am there, I will not wear their garb, I will not wear a yarmulke or not wear a hijab or whatever it may be. This way of thinking is deeply mistaken. His Holiness wears these various hats. Doesn't mean his refuge is hurt in any way. These are outer expressions, and when done from a good basis, they bring benefit to beings. This is recognized by them. There's not thoughts of His Holiness is confused about whether there's a creator God or not. Not at all. But it's received by people as someone who's showing them respect, visually as well as through his speech. So therefore, in our process of spiritual development, when we're developing our wisdom, our intelligence, will aid us in making the right decisions. Also, as we're developing our compassion, a deeper sense of valuing others, of respecting them despite their differences, and not seeing their differences as actually having meaning, but valuing people, whether they are like us or not. This will start to grow. And as this grows, it will aid our capacity to benefit others. It's easier to benefit those you have a lot in common with. But those that you don't have so much in common with, you need more skill. So in this way, by developing ourselves spiritually, we'll have more skill to deal with the diversity of beings. And that brings us to the end of our morning session. So thank you very much.